Welcome to Adventures in Life. I'm your host, Earl Beecher. In case you're wondering about that opening music, it's the theme song of our guest. Our guest is Paul Smith, a world-famous pianist. I've talked about him on the show before, but I finally managed to get him into the studio. And I guess it was a moment of weakness I caught you when I said, Paul.
Very nice to be here in Sherwood Forest.
Yeah, thank you. We decided to lay out a few of Paul's albums here in the foreground so that you can see. He has recorded, I don't know how many albums. I know of 150 that he has played on, and where he is the named star on 50 of them, at least. And what we have here, 6 of the Capitol albums are over here on this end. And then there are about 6 or 7 of the Verve and the MGM albums. Then he's done 16 albums for Outstanding. And then, Paul, you've done a lot of albums with some major stars that people would recognize over here.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, your career, I think, has been a stellar one. And what I'd like to do is to have you sort of outline some of the things that you've been able to do in your career and the people you've worked with, starting with the Andrews sisters.
That goes back a few years.
Yes. Well, did Patty just pass away?
No, Patty's still around.
Patty's still here.
Maxine just passed.
Maxine just passed. Okay, I wasn't straight on that.
Yeah. I got with them kind of through the back door. I was with the Les Paul Trio, and we were part of the show back in 1946 with them at the Paramount Theater in New York. So I kind of drew the job of accompanying them. At the same time, I was doing part of the other act with Les Paul. And
I want to mention for our viewers, the Les Paul Trio is what brought in the whole electronic guitar movement, which led to rock and roll and everything. This was the beginning.
Les is the guru.
He is the guru, and I've seen him recently on some commercials.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway.
He's nice enough to call me every time he comes in town, and we quack about the old days.
Oh, very good. Back to the Andrews sisters.
Yeah. What do you want to know about them?
Well, you traveled.
They were fun.
You traveled. I bet they were a lot of fun to work with. Was Patty as crazy as she used to appear in the movies?
Yeah. Well, no, Patty was the main talent of the three. You know, I mean,
yes.
They just worked out their harmonies, and usually 3-part harmonies, just straight ahead. And at the time, that was a big seller. They were as big as the Beatles in their day.
Yes, they were.
They had the crowds dashing in at the stage door entrance, and autograph hunters and fans and everything else. You know.
And you managed to avoid all that by being incognito in the band.
I was like to be able to get off the bus or off the plane or off the train and go right to my hotel and
avoid
sneak
the crowds.
in, as we say.
Yes. After you worked with the Andrews sisters, you were with Tommy Dorsey for a while.
Yeah, the Andrews sisters had a 5-day-a-week show coming up out on the coast, and I was supposed to do that with them, but at the time I didn't read quite that well, and I thought if I get into this studio thing and end up not reading well, the door closes and I get another shot about 15 years later. So I had a chance to go with the Dorsey band. I figured, well, it's a good experience because he was still playing the theaters and playing acts in the vaudeville circuit.
Well, he was the band of the year both years you were with him.
So I figured that would be much better for me to read some of these bad acts with the hieroglyphics and badly written music, you know, in blue chalk and everything else. And as it turned out, it was a good move because by the time I got off the Dorsey band, I was reading pretty well. And then to come into Hollywood and gradually work into the studios where you really have to read,
yes.
worked out very well.
Now, we started off with your theme song, which most people would recognize as a medley based upon Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf.
Yeah, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf.
Which was a cartoon song, and it is indicative. You have had the title for many years of Hollywood's favorite pianist, and I think one of the things that led to that was your work on the Dinah Shore Show, wasn't it?
Yeah, I spent 11 years on that show from about 1950 to I think around 1962, I think I left.
Now that was the Dinah Shore Chevy show.
Yeah, that was the Chevy. It started off. She started off originally with 2 15-minute shows, and then it expanded into 1 hour a week. It started but before they even built Burbank studios. They had the studios at the corner of Sunset and Vine, and they had 2 15-minute shows. What they used to call them vignettes.
Yes.
With a wonderful producer named Alan Handley. I mean, who made a little story out of each show. And then the show became very popular, and then Bob Banner took it over, and they moved it out to Burbank, and it became an hour show every Sunday.
Yes.
And they put us all on staff out there, you know, with the staff orchestra, and we ended up doing about 8 musicals a week, because everybody had a half-hour musical show. So there were a lot of musicals. I mean, that's it. It's changed considerably since
yes,
then, but
it
this was the early 50s.
Well, now, did you ever see Dinah lose her cool?
No, Dinah
strikes
was
me as
always, she was very one-dimensional. She was just sweet and nice at all times. I mean, that's all all
That's
you
a
can
lovely
say.
way to be.
Yeah, it's wonderful, you know. Nothing ever upset her. I never saw her get mad or upset or anything. She just came in and did her show happily and interviewed the guests and did a little dance sequence once in a while. And
Well, she worked, she had top stars on her show all the time, and I would think it would be very demanding to do the duet numbers and the other numbers that she did with these people. And
well, it was an hour a week, so I mean, you have 6 days
yeah.
to prepare for it.
Yes. Was it shot live?
Yeah, that was a live show.
So that hour was that hour.
You have some very interesting experiences in the days of the live television.
Tell me one or two anyway.
Well, generally, she was at the far end of the stage from the band. You see, they built CBS down at Beverly at the time they had the musicals. They built NBC out in Burbank at the time they had the musicals. And in their great knowledge and intelligence, they had no place for the orchestra.
A musical with no place for
Yeah.
the okay.
So we had the orchestra running up one of the side aisles, way over on the side there, at an angle like this, you know.
Oh, yes.
Piano was on a little angle. So when you would play an arpeggio for her, and she was at the far side of the stage, it was about a 9-iron shot from the orchestra over to where she was standing, and occasionally she couldn't hear it. And she would just start off her theme, and it wouldn't be in the same key that I gave her the arpeggio in. So at that time, there would be a frantic rest, what key is she in? And we would do the whole theme with the rhythm section, and I would signal either Vic Schoen or Harry Zimmerman, who were the two conductors over the years.
Yes.
What key she was in, and at the end of the thing, the band would play that. If she was in E, the band would play an E chord at the end, as though we knew what we were doing.
But it was up to you on the piano to get with it.
Yeah, the rhythm section had to do the following, you know. It wasn't her fault, it's just you play an arpeggio. It's like playing an arpeggio in Burbank and expect to hear it in Lomita, you know.
Yeah, gotcha.
Sometimes it just doesn't work, you know.
Yes. After the Dinah Shore show, well, at the same time, you were doing a lot of other radio shows, weren't you, on NBC?
No, I did most of the musicals that came out of NBC. We had, everybody had a half-hour show. We had Giselle McKenzie,
Yes.
Gordon McRae, Tony Martin, Nat Cole. Eddie Fisher had another show, which I didn't do. That was an hour show.
You didn't do Eddie Fisher, but you did all of the
No,
others.
But
Didn't you do music also for Jack Benny and Jimmy Durante?
I did a lot of specials in the. They had a lot of NBC specials that would feature, especially Durante. I only worked with Jack Benny once in my life.
Yes.
And I had to make a rehearsal at his house, and he and George Burns were sitting there together, and it was something you remember all your life, to see those two guys sitting together talking back and forth. Because no matter what George said, Benny couldn't keep a straight face. And no matter how funny Benny was, George wouldn't laugh at him. and to sit there watching them go back and forth was really something to watch. I mean, it was history in the making.
Yeah, I can, that would have been priceless to have taped that one.
Benny was always known as a very straight-faced comedian, you know, when he would do one of those and hold his chin and everything.
Yes.
Everybody could be laughing, and he'd keep that straight face. But he couldn't keep a straight face with George Burns.
Well,
no matter what Burns did,
genius.
you know, I mean, Benny would always
break up.
Yeah.
After you had been in the studios all this time, you were doing a Johnny Mercer show too, weren't you? There's an orange album up here I'd like to point to that is Johnny Sings Just for Fun.
I did a radio show with Johnny prior to my getting into television. When I first came into town, I came in about 1940, late 48, 49, and I starved for a year. I think I played a club out in the valley called the Showtime, which paid $15. And,
okay.
that was my whole salary for a while there. And then I somehow got in as a rehearsal pianist at Warner Brothers. And I used to play a lot of different things for the dancers, because knowing that they never listen to the melody, they just count the bars and the beats, you could get away with playing something other than da-da-da-da-da-da and the same thing all the time. So to avoid being bored, I would play other songs with the same number of bars and everything and the same stops for them to do their dancing.
Sure.
I was fortunate enough to have Ray Heindorf, who was the head of music out there, come in one day, and he listened to the piano going on behind the dancers at the rehearsal, and he said, you shouldn't be in rehearsal, you should be in their recording. So he moved me in, and I did all the pre-recording for the dancers and the singers and everything. And we had Gene Nelson and Jackie Leonard and Patrice Wymore, whole group of people out there. And from there, I accidentally did a record date, my first record date in town, with my friend Frank Comstock, and it was a date with Doris Day. And Frank gave me an 8-bar solo, and I think my whole career was made on that 8-bar solo, because in the booth, Paul Weston, who was at the time the head of music at Columbia, and Dave Klein, who was the top contractor in town, and it was one of those things. I played 8 bars, and they said, "Who's the new kid?" And I started getting calls. The next thing, I got a call from Dave Klein, and he said, "I want you to give up that studio job." And he said, "I'll guarantee you within a month you'll have 4 radio shows." So I gambled, because he was as good as his word. He got me Fibber McGee and Molly, which was one of the hot one of the hot radio shows, and the Kraft Music Hall with Bing, and then I was doing the Red Skelton show, and I've forgotten what the 4th one was, but he came up with 4 shows for me. And at the time, the union had a thing called a quota law, which was it was illegal as heck, but it was supposed to spread the work around so everybody didn't get too much work.
Oh, so no one person got too much work.
So I had 4 shows, so I was quoted. I couldn't do anything else. Couldn't do any studio calls. I could do records and commercials. Those were off the quota. And then the TV show came up, and I was advised, to stay with the old standbys. A guitar player who will remain nameless. So, he said, Chevrolet has never sponsored a show for any length of time. When I told him I was going with this little 15-minute television show, and that was right at the beginning of television.
Yes.
And he advised me to stay with Fibber McGee and Molly and Bing, because they'd been on for years and would continue to be on for years. And I said, well, I think TV is the coming thing, and I want to make a little less money, but I want to go ahead and take a shot at it. So as it turned off, about 6 months later, Fibber McGee went off the air, and Bing's Music Hall went off the air, and he went on into some television stuff.
They tell me it's time to pause for a public service announcement. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Paul Smith.
For free information on how you can help conserve our songbirds, write Songbirds, Washington, D.C., 20240.
Our guest is Paul Smith, a world-famous pianist. Paul, after the Dinah Chevy show, you left the studios for a while, and you began touring with Ella Fitzgerald. Is that true?
I went out with Ella in 1960 for the first time. I took a 6-month leave of absence from my steady job.
Yes.
And we went out for 6 months, during which time we went to Europe and South America. And at the end of the 6 months, I came back to NBC, and I stayed there for about another 6 or 8 months. And it got kind of tiresome doing This Is Your Life. From the music standpoint, it was a great show, but there really wasn't any music to speak of. And that was one of the shows I had to do every week as part of my staff job. So I stayed through 61, and then in 62, I quit the staff thing, and I signed a 46-week contract with Ella to go out with her. Had Stan Levy on drums and Wilfred Middlebrooks on bass, and we went out, and strangely enough, we worked for 46 weeks.
Well, Ella was really hot in the early 60s. That's when you recorded the Cole Porter songbook, the George Gershwin songbook, some of the greatest things she ever did.
Yeah, no, I think that happened a little bit earlier.
Did it?
That happened in the 50s, I believe, in the middle 50s.
I don't know. They're still selling today.
In the middle 50s, she started with the Buddy Bregman, with the Cole Porter and the Rodgers and Hart, and then the rest of the series. And then Paul Weston did the Irving Berlin songbook.
Now, while you were touring live with Ella, you did the Ella in Berlin album, which was recorded live.
That was the first album I made with her after I joined her. I met her in 1955 through Buddy Bregman. I was doing all of his work, and he was lucky enough to be chosen to do the first commercial album for Ella. You know, I mean, anybody that had that honor, so to speak,
yeah, really,
would have been a success with it, because I mean, she could sing the phone book and make it sound good. You know?
Yes.
But that's where I met her, and then in '60 when I went out with her, it was through that connection where I played on several of her record dates, and I got called for that. In '62, with the 46-week thing, we went out. We played double concerts in Europe, and we played a place called Freddy's up in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, for about a week and a half or 2 weeks. Did several lengthy dates. A week and 2 weeks, a lengthy date.
Yeah, in those days.
Because the rest of them were pretty much one-nighters, you know.
Now, wasn't her biggest... Did you say cut?
Yeah.
Do we need to...
Weeks.
That was about the time that you recorded the Cole Porter songbook, the George Gershwin songbook in that series for Verve?
No, the songbooks were recorded in the middle '50s. With
I didn't realize they were that old.
Yeah, they started back around '55, '56, if I recall correctly, because that's where Ella knew me from when she hired me in 1960, and again in '62 when I went out with her. But the '62 job was it was a lot of fun, but boy, we worked hard. You know,
well, no, I wanted to ask you about, what wasn't her biggest hit, Mac the Knife?
That was one of the big ones, you know, after Tisket a Tasket, which was much earlier.
Oh, yeah. Now, on Mac the Knife, that was Ella in Berlin, and that was a live concert you were doing with her.
Yeah, we did it at the Deutschlandhallen first, and then Norman Granz wanted to get some other versions of it, kind of, so he recorded, I think, in Frankfurt and Hamburg and several other German cities, and we were doing a whole tour of Europe at the time, and it came back to the first one, which we'd done in Berlin. That was the one. And
well, that's the one she forgot the words.
Yeah, well, I mean, she could forget the words to anything. It's no, believe me, it's no problem. I mean, she can ad-lib usually better words than the composer wrote most of the time. And she could get out of anything musically. She had no problems with that whatsoever.
She's one of those super talents.
Oh yeah, no, she was a giant of her time. You know, they're having a tribute to her in July back at Carnegie Hall. Fortunately, I was asked to go back there. And Tommy Flanagan, who spent 16 years with her from the time I left in '62. I left in '62, and Tommy took over, and he stayed with her till 1978, and he had a couple of health problems then after 16 years. And I came back, I think, 78 to 80. And then I left, and Jimmy Rolls came in from 80 to 82, and then I came back in 82, and her schedule
Keep working with Ella.
Her schedule was down pretty much then to where I could tolerate it. You know, I couldn't keep up with her. I mean,
incredible.
She really worked.
There's some other major stars that you've worked with, and I want to mention Sammy and Steve in particular. Let's talk about Sammy first.
Well, Sammy probably is the most talented man, I think, that ever graced the stage anywhere in the world.
We're talking about Sammy Davis Jr.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's only one Sammy, you know, unless you get around to Sammy Kahn. You know?
Yeah, well.
But Sammy was so superb at everything he did. I mean, he sang beautifully. There was never a moment of embarrassment on the stage, no matter what could happen. He just controlled that audience like a...
Things would happen, though.
No, not really. I mean, you know, you always had that feeling of surety. You could be assured that he would handle no matter anything that would come up. But nothing really came up on the stage. Once in a while, he would crack a note or something at the end, and if the voice shattered on him, he would stop the orchestra and he'd say, "Take it from..."
I'm going to do it right this time.
The last 6 bars, he said, "You paid to get in, you deserve a better note than the one I just sang." And then once in a while he'd try it again, and then it got to be kind of a stock thing where he'd miss it twice, and then finally he'd hit it the 3rd time through, and the audience, of course, would go berserk. You know.
Yeah. Well, I understand that occasionally when something go wrong, you'd start to go into a sort of a patter routine, and he'd go into Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah, well, over the length of time I was with him, it became almost 60 minutes of piano for an hour show, because I mean, I backgrounded everything from the time we played his opening theme and brought him on. As he walked on sometimes, I'd play maybe Groucho's theme song. He would do 2 minutes of Groucho. You know, just I just throw things at
He
him.
would pick it up
And he would
instantly.
pick it up if he felt like it. If he just kept walking on, and I played Groucho's theme, and he just kept walking to the mic, he didn't feel like doing it that night. So I'd just go into a little background music. But it reached a point where the only tunes that were definite was the opening that brought him on, and Bojangles to close, and everything else he would call during the show.
You'd be on ready to go.
And the and he would always give the orchestra plenty of time. Hey, let's do Singing the Blues or something, and you know, and George would have plenty of time to get the music out, and the piano would be going anyway. And I mean, I'd throw him something, maybe Keystone Cops or something, and if he felt like it, all of a sudden he'd do a little thing all around the stage like a Keystone Cop.
It must be incredible to have that kind of talent.
Yeah.
He was Entertainer of the Year 2 of the years that you were with him, I think.
Well, as an example, I mean, in 1972, I left the studio thing because I really didn't want to get into the electronics. Everything was becoming electronic. And I came home one day and I said to my wife, you realize that I've been doing dates almost every day for the last month and I haven't touched the piano? Everything was the Moog and the ARP and the synthesizers and everything. And I mean, I really wasn't into that. I really didn't enjoy playing it. And at the age I'm at, I'm 73 now, be 74 in about 2 more months. Even back in 72, I just wanted to play piano. I really didn't want to fool around with the electric. If I was 25 years old, I'd have gone out and bought all the battery of stuff and had the carded service and probably been all right. But, you know, I spent 20 years reading fly spots in the studios, you know. So when I went with Sammy, the reading ability came down a little bit because we played the same things over a period of time, you know. And I went with him originally just to do 2 concerts. He called me because he'd worked on the Steve Allen show with me. And his conductor said, you want to do a couple of one-nighters with it? I said, fine. He said, yeah, the first one's in Berlin, the second one's in Paris. I said, great, send me a ticket, you know. So he sent me a ticket. And of course, Pan Am in its wonderful service was 16 hours late getting off the ground from LA. So when I got to Germany, I took a cab to the theater and went right on with no rehearsal and played the show. It was a thing for UNICEF over there. And then the next night we flew over and did a thing in Paris. And then I was invited to join him for a couple of weeks up in Vegas. And I said, that's wonderful, because Louis Bellson was with us on the 2 concerts in Europe. And he was also going to do the 2 weeks with Sam up at the Sands in Vegas. So I thought, oh, that'd be fun. So I went up there and I played. I went up initially for 2 weeks. I stayed 4 years. Didn't make a lot of money, but it was such a happy job, and he was such a delight to work with. I mean, that every night you came on the stand, it was fun and games. I just loved it. So
Now, you said that you met him through the Steve Allen show. I want to ask a question about him. Have you ever seen Steve Allen when he was caught and speechless?
You mean at a loss for words?
At a loss for words?
I don't think anybody ever has.
He's always on top of it, isn't he?
He's too fast. He's a great intellectual. I mean, on any subject you want to discuss. I mean, he's got a library at his house there, I mean, which I doubt if any of the other talk show hosts have ever done this. But if he was going to have a nuclear physicist on the show, which he quite often did, he had someplace in his library would be something on nuclear fission or some subject that the physicist would discuss. And he could talk to anybody on their level. I don't care what they were, was a brain surgeon or whatever it is. He would bone up on it and be able to discuss very intelligently any subject that came up for them.
And at the same time, it was funny.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, he's one of the fastest men that I've ever seen as far as retorts and taking a simple sentence and finding something funny about it.
Yes.
As an example, I mean, we had he used to have the audience on his shows become part of the show. That somebody would,
Man on the street kind of thing.
Yeah, but in the studio.
In the studio, okay.
And I remember one of the first ones I remember was so fast. You know, he said, "What do you do for a living, sir?" He says, "I'm with the Edison Company." And Steve immediately said, "Well, more power to you." Now that is a fast mind. I mean, to put those two together, because it wasn't. If it was set up, that's something, you know. But I mean, none of these are set up. I mean, everything was cold turkey with him. You know,
yes.
Somebody said something, he had an answer for him, you know.
You're touring with him occasionally now and doing things.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. I mean, he's playing pretty good piano now, which is nice, you know. And then, so we have a lot of two-piano stuff, and he's gracious enough. I mean, there are very few people who play an instrument who will introduce somebody and say they play more piano than they do. And he is gracious enough to give me a big build-up every time we work together.
Yes, and I happen to hear from members of the audience that you live up to it, so that...
I have to. I mean, he puts me on the spot that way.
That's great.
He goes through a whole scene about, you know, that most pianists are either black or Jewish, and they look a certain way. And he says, I don't know how Paul Smith ever got into this business as a pianist. He says, he looks more like security. And then he said, no, on second thought, he looks like a Nebraska Cornhusker. You know,
well, at 6'5", Paul, I've heard a lot of comments about you look more like a piano mover.
Yeah, but he's a total delight to work with. I enjoy every date I do with him, you know. Because as he says, I mean, he's the first man that comes on and says to the audience, I really don't have an act, you know. He says, I just come out here and I mean, whatever you want. He said, if you want to work for prizes or something, would you like something?
Yeah, great. There's another entertainer, Bing Crosby, who I think of as everyone's idol. Mm-hmm. And the two of the last albums that Bing did, you were the arranger, the conductor, and the accompanist on those.
Yeah, I did the whole thing. We did one called Bingo Viejo, and the other one was Southern Memoirs. Bingo Viejo was the last one I did with him, and it was more for the Latino population. As he sang one chorus in English, one chorus in Spanish.
I think it's a great idea.
And the other one was a lot of the just what the title implies, Southern Memoirs. You know, songs like Swanee River and down in North Carolina. Everything was connected indirectly with the South. You know.
Yes, that'd be very pleasing. And I told you after I had heard the album, I never heard Bing sound better, and you said that's because when you did the arrangements, you kept him in his richest range.
Well, he was smart enough. As he got older, he changed his keys. You know, your voice gets a little lower as you get older.
Yes.
And he couldn't hit the high notes that he used to hit. So, being a very intelligent man, he put a lot of his things down about a fourth. And his best sound was his low register. I mean, the boo 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 routine.
Yes.
You know. And when we did the albums, I mean, I didn't write kind of trite stuff behind him. I mean, I just wrote what I thought would fit. And I told him, I said, you just sing the way you sing, and we'll put endings on the same way you would do the endings, and I'll worry about the band behind you. But just sing the way you would sing. You don't have to adjust to the band. We'll have the band adjust to you, but it's going to be a swinging band.
I can't resist doing this, Paul. They're giving me the signal we're running out of time. Paul has written a series of jazz books for the Mel Bay Publishing Company, and I saw Mr. Bay at the NAMM convention one year, and he said to me that they were the best books in jazz. They compared to the Hannon books and classics. Mm-hmm. He was very pleased. The other thing is a comment. We have been talking about people you've worked with, but we haven't talked about you that much. We started off by showing the albums you've done, and on the liner notes of one of the albums Steve Allen wrote, he said the big three are Art Tatum, Oscar Peterson, and Paul Smith, which puts you in some pretty good company. And he added the phrase, and not necessarily.
I appreciate that kind of a plug.
He added the phrase, and not necessarily in that order. So that this, I think, gives people an idea of the capabilities that you have and the fact that you are playing concerts around the world at the present time. Thank you for being with us on Adventures in Life. This has been fun.
It was my pleasure to be here in Sherwood Forest with you.
And thank you for being with us. Please join us soon again for more Adventures in Life.